My name is Burke Griggs. I teach natural resources law at Washburn University, and I'm going to talk briefly about how water law and water management policy provide a useful perspective on our current situation. I'd like to make four main points. First, like public health, with water we're dealing with a public resource. Water wasn't always viewed as a public resource, but starting in the 19th century, we came to realize that water must be a public resource to guard against speculation, hoarding, and inefficient use. Many state constitutions thus dedicate the waters of the state to the people of the state. We also saw public entities displace private water companies as water suppliers, such as in New York City. We decided we didn't want to entrust something as valuable as water and as valuable as clean water supplies to private entities. After the Great Flood of 1927, across the Mississippi River system, the United States Army Corps of Engineers built public flood control projects across the country. And many water rights, which are private property rights in the use of water, are subject to the public trust doctrine, especially in California. And almost all water rights across the West, and indeed across the country, are subject to public interest review. That is, whether it is in the public interest to allow such uses of water. My second point is that, like public health, we don't have a substitute for water. This makes water a unique natural resource in property law. Indeed, it's the resource to which we often turn for crisis metaphors. In times of economic crisis, such as right now, we speak of the need for liquidity flows, the need to prime the pump of the economy by making large infusions of cash. Keynesian economics is awash in water metaphors. But while the United States can print money, it can't make it rain. We have substitute resources for energy. We can substitute natural gas for coal for electricity generation. We can substitute natural gas for oil to heat our homes. We can also substitute hydropower, solar, and wind for natural gas and coal, replacing hydrocarbon sources with renewable substitute sources. We can substitute gold and silver as the basis for our economy, as we did in 1893 when we went off the silver standard. Or we can go off the gold standard as we did in 1971. We can substitute one precious metal for another, or get rid of those precious metals as base metals entirely, because none of them have any inherent value, but water does. My third point is that, like public health, water law and policy raise hard questions of federalism. We are seeing this play out at the moment as some states issue shelter-in-place orders while others do not. Probably the most distinct difference right now is between the states of Louisiana and Mississippi. With water, the states generally have power over water resources and the allocation of water rights. There are, however, important exceptions to this rule of deference to state law. We have these exceptions because there are certain problems, regional flooding problems, interstate irrigation challenges, and water pollution that, like the coronavirus, do not obey state boundaries, and which raise problems and challenges that only the United States can confront. The most important water power at the moment is probably the Army Corps of Engineers. It has vast federal powers over managing the water supplies in our reservoirs and our dams, and managing the operation of our levees and flood control systems. States in the United States regularly clash over this division of power over water, and indeed there are multiple suits presently before the Supreme Court on this issue. My fourth point is that drought and flooding, like disease, are beyond our boundaries and our control. But when we fail to prepare, we create our own emergencies. It is becoming obvious that we were not prepared and are not prepared for the virus outbreak. The head of the Centers for Disease Control announced that formally this week. We've also been failing to prepare for water-related emergencies for decades. We're suffering from long-standing and worsening infrastructural decay of our levees, dams, and reservoir systems. And it's not just famously vulnerable cities such as New Orleans or Miami. It's also cities such as Sacramento or Fargo or Jackson, Mississippi. Global climate change is making these vulnerabilities worse. It's already made flood damage from hurricanes in the Gulf worse, and it's reducing the amount of water we have available for irrigation across the West and the Midwest. And so this summer, you may see the convergence of the virus and the water emergencies. I'd like to show you two maps. First, there's the most recent virus outbreak map. While the hardest hit areas are in the Northeast at the present, we are seeing more and more cases in the Ohio and Missouri River basins. The Corps of Engineers is dealing with this first emergency. It's building temporary hospitals across the country. Next, I'd like you to look at the United States Geological Survey's Water Watch map. This gives an index of flood levels in the rivers across the country. This spring, as the snows across the Missouri River basin melt and swell the levels of that basin and the Mississippi River, the Corps of Engineers will be dealing with that emergency as well. We may see these maps converge, the coronavirus outbreak maps and the flood maps in high populated river towns such as Kansas City, St. Louis, Memphis, and New Orleans. So where do these maps and the points I've made so far leave us? I'll end with two conclusions. The first is that all of our natural resources are connected. Water use affects land use and vice versa. Hotter air temperatures make for more violent flooding and more intense tornadoes, which contaminates and destroys land. Therefore, we need to think about our resources in an integrated way. But our legal systems are generally segregated, resource by resource, which makes this more difficult. And the second conclusion is this. If we are going to protect public health in this crisis and restore it after the virus has flooded through our population, we need to rebuild our public systems, especially our public water and health systems. And that is going to have to be a national, public, and largely federal effort, the likes of which we have not seen in a very long time, since the 1980s or so, when we began to turn our backs not only on the public works projects, but on the public itself. Water is a public resource, so is public health, and thank you for watching this presentation.